Thanks, laddie. September 29th, 1998 was a Tuesday. And I got up and looked over in bed and didn't see my wife. And that was odd because we've been married 10 years and always slept together at night. Had a couple of boys and so forth. And I thought, that's weird. I wonder where she is. So I went out and walked around the house and couldn't find her. And Connor comes out of his room. He's 4 years old. Where's Mommy? I don't know. Something was strange. Kyle gets out of bed. He's 14. He runs over and says, where's Mom? So we look in the living room, dining room. We finally run downstairs. And we see her face down in front of the washer and dryer. And it looks like she's dead. She's face down. She's kind of curled up a little bit. So I go rushing down there, and I told Connor, I said, go call the medics, go call the fire people, go call the police, what have you. They run upstairs. Connor starts crying. Kyle's screaming, what's going on? I turn her over. She's got all this stuff coming out of her mouth. And I clear that out, and I start doing CPR and chest compressions and all those things that you learn from Red Cross. And it all comes back to you. Any of you that have ever taken those kind of courses, believe me, it comes back at a time like that. So within a couple of minutes, the house is just teeming with all these fire and medic personnel. And they take her out into this other room, and they have all these tubes, and they got those paddles, just like you see on TV, and doing all this kind of stuff, and wires, and all sorts of things. And for any of you that have ever been through anything that's traumatic, time loses all measure. And I remember like it's yesterday. This September 29th, 98 was 14 years ago. And this little short fire lady comes up to me and she goes, we have been working on your wife for an hour and a half, and there's still no heartbeat. Do you want us to continue? And even in a state of shock, you know that after 90 minutes, it's probably hopeless. And so I said, well, you can stop. And again, for anybody that's ever been through shock, it's a very, very strange phenomenon. I think apparently they're to protect you. But I remember walking around in a state of just staring out at space, and my friends and family came over, and then they take her away, and she goes off to the morgue. And again, Connor was inconsolable. He was 4 at the time. And then within a couple of days, I remember walking upstairs and walking out to this small deck we had. And I just sort of stared out to the sky, and I thought, for the first time in my life, I understand why people kill themselves. And I don't know if I can do this. And as you'll find out in a second, this wasn't the first death that I had experienced. But I just remember sitting there thinking, and almost kind of staring out there, I got to stay around. But you're just still a flesh and blood person who you just wonder, can you handle this kind of thing? So as the days went on, other things happened, but I want to first tell you a little bit about my background. I grew up in Spokane, Washington in 1950. So quick math will tell you, because I'm 62. Wow. And it's gone by very, very fast. That clearly was such a turning point in my life. But I grew up in Spokane. We later moved over to Seattle. And really my only thing of note in Spokane was, because I was on the local news when I was about 10, because I had an electric go-kart. And the thing is you go, well, electric, was there a battery? No, I chose to use extension cords. My dad wouldn't give me a gas engine. So he says, well, there's this old motor from the dryer if you want to try that. And so I put it together, and I didn't know about batteries or anything, and so we got this cord, we're running up and down the street, and the things are blowing out. But anyway, we finally got smart and made it into a circle and just went like this the whole time. You know, at least it was fun for a 10-year-old or 12-year-old, but I did get on the local news, so that was kind of a highlight there. But later, when we moved to Seattle, I went on to the University of Washington. And my very first year there, I had a teacher that asked me, he said, you know, would you come back and speak to this group? When I was a freshman, he said, will you come back and speak to this group in high school about what it takes to be successful? And I wasn't sure why he picked me. I mean, I did okay in high school, but nothing really extraordinary. So I went back and talked to this group, and honestly, it was probably about and I was 19, and I had my little water, and my mouth was all dry, and I was all freaked out. But I remember thinking at that very moment, I want to be a speaker someday. And I wasn't really sure what the topic would be. I've always kind of been an energetic guy until I met Todd, and I'm kind of a distant second to him. But it's and you're like ahead of me as well. So it was something that I wanted to do. I never knew what my subject was going to be. But as I went along through life, this is what was sad, is I started losing people left and right. And my mother died of cancer, and to make matters worse, I was only in my 20s. She had been a manic depressive condition, or had a manic depressive condition, which is now considered bipolar. So I'd be going to the University of Washington. She'd always threaten suicide. I just never got it. You better come here right now. I'm going to take these pills. And it was really brutal. And when you take enough punches, I think, in life, one of the reasons why I ultimately discovered gratitude is because you're going to have to find something. You have to find something that's going to help. So then, about 4 or 5 years later, my father was a very prominent attorney, committed suicide. And he was not exactly Mr. Positive. He was a very, very negative guy. But it just kept mounting more and more and more people. The night I graduated from high school, 2 of my best friends were killed in a car accident on Dexter, just outside of where I went to school, on Queen Anne High School, on Queen Anne Hill. And then several friends in Vietnam, and then it just kept going on and on and on through Dana's death and after, and people I had known very well, excuse me, known very well, my doctor, and several of them were prescription pill overdoses, which is what ultimately killed Dana, so I'll tell you about in a second. And what really disturbed me about that, it's one thing to be in an accident. We see these things unfortunately happen from time to time. But it's quite another thing where you're involved with your own death, and you had some part of it. And whether these were overdoses or these different things that happened, it was really, really frustrating. And I realized that the biggest thing that changed me, and I think a lot of the audiences I speak to, I think resonate with this, is that life is not easy. In fact, it's very difficult. And typically life is kind of like this. And this is fun, and this is not fun. But this is where all the lessons are. And this is where you really find out what you're made of. And so, but I realized people don't have healthy coping mechanisms. They have a heck of a lot of negative ones. And sadly, a lot of those negative ones kill people. Prescription pills, booze, coke, crack, whack, all this nonsense that's out there. In fact, there was a statistic that came out recently that prescription medication is now killing more people than alcohol. And typically alcohol has been the leader in that. In fact, I saw an article in the one of the Bellevue papers that this is the newest phenomenon. I live in Seattle, and in Bellevue on the east side, people break into these houses, and the TVs, the electronics, literally the money and everything is left right where it is, and the medicine cabinet's been raided. And that's what happened. And so they take all the medication. So I remember thinking that at some point, I'm going to have to learn how to deal with this. And I think, and what happened with Dana, Dana had been hooked on prescription medication. We met when we were both working at a local department store, especially store Nordstrom. And I get a call one day, and she's been arrested for prescription fraud. And I think it's a joke. I mean, I think it's a friend of mine who's a cop that's kidding me. And I go down, and I've never seen somebody handcuffed like this before. And here she is, and she goes, I have a really big problem. And over time, she dealt with that. We got that at least taken care of. She was in the detox program about 2 weeks, 3 weeks each, for 3 different times. And we're talking about somebody who's 38 years old, very, very good shape, very energetic, athletic. Our first date was running in a lake in Seattle instead of going out and having a beer or something. So I go to see him after the 3rd time that she'd been in detox, because I need to talk to him. I talked to all the spouses of the patients here at Everett Providence. One incident. He says, see all those people out there? There's a room again, 40 or 50 people. And he says, there's a doctor, there's a lawyer, there's a policeman. He wanted to make sure I didn't feel bad, because everybody can be subject to some, from whatever walk of life, addiction. And he looks at Dana and he says, see, she's out there with him as well. And I want you to know what you're up against. He says, 1 out of 20 of them will have a normal life. And of the 19 that don't, half of them will be dead in the next couple of years. And at the time she was 37, and so I thought, that's never going to happen to Dana. And then a year later, she was dead. And it made me really realize this 1 in 20 thing. Now, one of the things that has changed my life, which I'll get to in a minute, is a gratitude journal. I have my own, and I've written several books on gratitude, and it really saved my life. In fact, the title, it depends on sometimes how big the group is and how much time I have. The title of the major keynote I give is called From Grief to Gratitude, because it really saved me. And if it wasn't for gratitude and understanding it and everything you appreciate in your life, I wouldn't be standing here. and I know that. And even as strongly as I felt for being a father for Connor and Kyle. But I realized the 1 in 20 thing, and this is something I always extend to audiences, is are you that one, or are you one of the 19? Are you the one that's going to do something? We all talk about, we're going to start that diet tomorrow. You know, we're going to do this next week. We'll wait till after Christmas. And of course, the gyms have thousands of people on January 1st, and on March 1st is like 3 people, because the New Year's resolutions don't work too well. But I always want to encourage people to ask yourself, are you that one, or are you the 19? Because it's so easy to say you're going to do something. So along the way, I had always thought about this 1 in 20. And I had a little detail shop that I did, and that was what I was running when Dana died. Ended up losing the detail shop, ended up losing all our money we had saved, and lost the house, and we had to unfortunately move out. And this is where Connor was he was about 5 by then, so we hung on for about 6 months to a year. But prior to that, when I had the detail shop, I was talking to this one gal named Tracy. So I was still pitching the same thing I'm pitching today. Are you the 1 or are you the 19? And so she'd say, I'm so sick of you talking about that. I said, well, Tracy, I'm just going to tell you, which one are you? So then one day she comes to me and she says, I have some bad news, I'm pregnant, and it's like one of the guys in the shop. Okay, those things happen. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to move to Texas, and I'm going to have my baby, and I'm going to change my life. And it's because of you. Because you told me I'm going to be the 1, I'm not going to be the 19. So I said, okay. You know, and I think Tracy had kind of a tough life. I don't know, she may have not had the best family situation. I think she may have worked in an adult club or something. I'm not really sure. But I know she hadn't had the best circumstance or best background. But I was so impressed with her ability to say she was going to change things. And she said, you watch, I will be that 1. And she'd heard me so many times. So about 6 or 8 months later, I get a call one day. Dave, this is Tracy. Frankly, I kind of forgot. And she reminds me, oh, Tracy, of course. She goes, well, I'm down here in Houston, and I just want you to know I was the 1. I go, well, that's fantastic. And she goes, you remember I was pregnant, so I had my baby. And I said, that's fantastic. What is it? It's a little baby boy. His name was, I think, Walt or something like that. And she goes, but even better yet, I met a new guy, and I've completely changed my life. I said, great. And she had a lot of bad luck. What's his name? His name's Robert. I said, so what's Robert do? She goes, well, he's on work release right now. And I just went,
oh no.
Tracy, and when you're going to change your life, somebody once said this to me, and I thought it was such a great line. If you want to change your life, and do things completely differently. So as I struggled along, I had some success in my 20s. This was prior to meeting Dana. And here I was with all that success. Everything was gone. The house was gone. The business was gone. The money was gone. And you really find out what you're made of. And that's why I really push this 1 or the 19. You know, which are you? It doesn't matter what it is in life. It's this whole Winston Churchill thing. Never, never, never give up. So we were forced to move out. Kyle went to live with his grandparents because it was really tough for me at that time. Connor and I went to live with a friend. And he said, why don't you come and just stay in my apartment for a while? I said, that's great. I was just barely hanging on after all this stuff. And to make matters worse, there was financial implications too, because she would never go to get the insurance checkup, and I found out later is because she knew she wouldn't pass it, because you've got to do the blood and urine and things like this, and if you're doing stuff, they're not going to need insurance. So we had no insurance. So it was just, people were coming after me left and right and so forth. So I'm living in Jim's apartment. And the very first night we're there, he says, well, he was very kind. Why don't you sleep in my bed? I said, Jim, I'm not going to do that. Connor and I will sleep on the couch, and I just appreciate having me. And it was just another one of these points where you just don't know how you're going to bounce back. So here's this couch, but it was kind of at an angle like this, so it really wasn't very easy to sleep in. You know, and I kind of roll on Connor, and he looks at me like, oh, you're too heavy. And I go, Connor, we have bigger problems than how heavy I am right now. So I found a piece of foam, and I rolled out a piece of foam, and I got a sleeping bag right by this dining room table. And I was 9, 10 years older than Dana, so I'm probably late 40s, early 50s at the time, so I'm not exactly a kid anymore. So I crawl into the sleeping bag, and here I am huddling with Connor. And I just remember he started to fall asleep, and I didn't kind of almost keep from crying because it was really such a devastating time. And I just looked up to the sky and I went, so it's come to this. The once almighty Dave Brooke is sleeping on a piece of foam in an apartment with nothing but his son. And it's pretty devastating. So one of the things that you realize, any journey, now I don't know, I know several of you here, but I know that most all of us have had some really tough times in our life, maybe all of us. But the point is what do you do when you want to bounce back from that? And that's this recurring theme that comes back to why gratitude has been so important. And I've had a lot of friends, I'm blessed to have a lot of friends from college days, and when I worked at Nordstrom and different jobs I've had, they've said, I'm surprised you didn't turn to the pills yourself. Or, I'm surprised you didn't turn to the bottle. Or, I'm surprised I've seen people jump off bridges. I mean, it's just all these sad things that people do when times get tough. And they will get tough. I remember meeting Quincy Whitfield. We were talking about some of the things he went through. He and I had a very similar conversation. But I realized another one of the themes, and gratitude is so important, but like Winston Churchill said, you have to not give up. You have to hang in there. And there's just story after story after story of people that didn't give up. And they're very inspiring to me. There's the Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, 300 banks turned him down to do his movie. You know, Walt Disney went to tons and tons of banks before he got financing for Disneyland. And in my personal favorite, because at my age, 62, and still hanging in there and hopefully having a lot of years left on this planet, is Colonel Sanders. Didn't even start KFC until his mid-60s. So you just have to really look at that person in the mirror and say, am I that one or am I that 19? So unfortunately for me, there was things that didn't get better. And I thought, boy, I don't know how many more punches I can take. You know, and it's like when somebody punches you in the stomach, if you get ready for it, it kind of touches those a little bit, you know, it's not going to knock the wind out. But when you're not expecting it, you get the wind knocked out of you. So about 6 months after Dana died, the gal at the nursery school, or not, I guess it was kindergarten by that time, says, Connor's got severe disabilities. He's got all sorts of problems. You're going to need occupational therapy, you're going to need all this physical therapy, there's all these things. And what's wrong? And they said, we've done all these tests on him. And so I went to do these tests that day. We were at this school, because I got to be the best dad I can. I mean, now they've lost their mom, so I've got to be even a superstar dad to make up for that. And so I said, well, what is it? And so they go through, and it's about 7-8 hours, and I come in and I sit down, and the gal tells me this assessment. Honestly, I can't remember. All I know is that she checked every box on the thing. I said, well, you know, his mom just died 6 months ago. And she goes, I don't, you know, really, whatever. I mean, I couldn't believe her attitude. And she says, but he's going to need this, this, and this. And I said, well, you know, he's been through a lot. She says, well, you know, again, whatever. And then they asked me a bunch of questions. And so it was an assessment that related to the Seattle Public School District. So I had no other options at that point. So just as we're about to leave, I send Connor out to the car. And I said, you know, can I just tell you something? I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to be the best dad ever. But I said, I was a pretty decent athlete in my life. And I said, he's going to go to Roosevelt High School, the local high school there. I said, he's going to be a starting quarterback someday. And she goes, no. He is not going to be any quarterback anytime, ever. He's never going to be there. Well, I'm sure you've heard stories about that kind of thing, because we all have, sometimes in the media, wherever, about people that are told they can't do it. But for the next 4 or 5 years, I was afraid she was right. He couldn't hit. He loved to play baseball. Couldn't hit. Couldn't throw. Couldn't catch. Didn't really run. And he'd go out and strike out every time. And he'd run back into the dugout and do like this, just tears pouring down his. Now, he just lost his mother a few years ago. I'm still doing. I can't run out there and get him in the dugout, for crying out loud. I've got to let him be there with his teammates and struggle through this as best he can. So over time, he just didn't really get much better. And so I always tell him, I said, you just can't give up. We didn't give up when Mom died. You can't give up now. And it's so much more than baseball. It's all about life. And whatever odds you have against you, you got to hang in there. So we get to May 31st, 2005, I think it was, and he had his Little League game. And I'm in the stands, and it's 7-6, the other team, bottom of the 7th, and there's 2 out. Guess who comes up the back? And I see Connor coming out of the dugout, and I'm doing, how about a walk? How about a walk? You know? And I thought about this. Once somebody said, you know, why do you pray at a time like that? Like, well, it just seemed logical. And how about no strikeout?